Daniel, in 1989, I was one of those guys you'd see pushing a shopping cart around Vancouver's downtown east side. Heroin addiction, homelessness, mental health, suicide ideation. I knew there was more inside me, but I just couldn't find it. I had a conversation with a guy named Gus. Joe, there's more to you than you could see. I was scruffy, I was wearing the same clothes for 2 years. I was looking for that way out, that possibility. I was looking to finally change my life.
All right, what's going on, everybody? That was tonight's guest, the Skid Row CEO, Joe Roberts. I'm Daniel Unmanageable, and this is Hard Knox Talks, coming at you from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Treaty Number 6 territory, and the traditional homeland of the Métis people. Let's bring in Joe. What's up, Joe?
Hey, Daniel. Great to be on the program.
It's good to finally have you. I've been having my eye on you for a while, and our mutual friend Alan was like, "You got to get Joe on the show," and I was like, "You know what? That's a damn good point." And here we are, a couple weeks later. So I'm actually surprised how fast we were able to bring you on here with how busy you are.
Well, you can thank Marie for that. She manages the calendar. So, and you know what? This is a good place for the story. I've been watching you as well out of the corner of my eye the last little while, and just I love what you're doing. I love the space that you're creating. I love the message that you're delivering. So it's a good place to be on a Tuesday night.
Yeah, sorry if that threw you. We get random hugs on Hard Knox Talks from our kids.
all good in the hood.
Yeah. So before we jump in, is there anything that you would like to say?
No, just thanks. I haven't needed to work in a long time, and I'm in the same kind of space that you are, although we do different work. It's about, driving a message of possibility, giving people information and inspiration and hope, because we all have it within us to transform and to change, no matter where we are. As long as we're still breathing and 6 feet, above dirt, we've got the ability to change our lives and move forward. And so I'm just grateful to be here today to just share my humble little journey.
All right. Well, with that, let's get at it.
This is Hard Knox Talks.
Okay, before we jump in, I just want to let our viewers and listeners know that tonight's live production is sponsored in part by Prairie Harm Reduction. So, Joe, all eyes on you. Where do we even start? I mean, you've had a crazy journey that ended up, you walked all the way across Canada. You came off the streets of Vancouver. Where did it all get started for you? Was there drinking and drugging growing up?
Yeah, I think, the story is painfully common. And one of the things I want to dispel right away is I'm not special. Some of the things I've done have been special. And the only difference between me and somebody else is that I've been banging away on this for 32 years. And I've put some effort into my life, my recovery. But yeah, real normal upbringing. I was raised in a little town in north of Toronto, about an hour and a half north of Toronto, a little place called Midland. And for the first 8 years of my life, things were perfect. I can remember going to school, and for me, school was a fun time. I was that kind of kid who, if you sat beside me, you wouldn't have got good grades, but we would have made some memories together.
Good memories. Yeah. C's get degrees.
Yeah, it was. I was good. I got an A+ at recess. Hankster the prankster, the wannabe gangster. That was me as a kid. I was rambunctious, I probably would have been a poster kid for Ritalin, right? But what was awesome was my home life. The bell would ring at school, and I would run down that wooded pathway to home, and waiting for me at home was this extraordinary family. I had a dad that, he was a traditional dad. He went to work, he came home, he invested time with us kids. He was a hockey coach. He was a baseball coach. We would do summer vacations. And my father was the kind of guy who would say things to me like, "I love you. You can do and be anything." He spoke to my possibility. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. And it's not that she couldn't have had a career. She wanted to be mom. And so I had an older brother, a younger sister, fat little dog named Angus that had magical powers. He could hear you unwrap a cheese wrapper from 3 blocks away, right? But maybe we shouldn't have fed him off the table.
My son can do that.
Yeah, so it's like first 8 years, it was perfect. It's like the Andy Mayberry show. It was like a sitcom. I'd come home from work, come home and have cookies, and I'd play in a tree fort in the backyard. And I had a little BMX bike and used to ride around the town that I lived in. I had 5,000 people. So it was like this perfect upbringing. And then, wandering down the road of life, minding our own business, and life us. And we got a knock on the door one day and Dad was gone. Just like that. It's like the entire trajectory of our family headed south. And what happened next was just a series of really unfortunate events. My mom remarried within a year. And I don't fault her for that because she had this enormous responsibility. She lost her life partner. The person in this, this relationship to raise these 3 kids, age 5, 8, and 11. She lost the love of her life. And the family, we lost our economic security. And so she remarried. Now, the guy interviewed real well, but when he got into the house, his true colors, showed themselves, and he was a violent, abusive alcoholic. And so I went from, a father that said things like, I love you, you can be and do anything, to a man who'd say things like, you're dumb, you're stupid, you're a piece of shit, you'll never amount to anything. And I was 8.5 years old. And so, at a very young age, I had these cracks in my self-worth. We had this trauma of losing Dad, and we never dealt with it, right?
So
and we didn't talk about mental health in the 70s and stuff like that. Go ahead.
And not in the spirit of throwing your mother under the bus or anything like that, but how did your mother respond to that when he started treating you that way? Like, knowing how you've grown up.
As a kid, I didn't get it. I really didn't get it. And I did cast some blame her way. But what I understand now is that she was sort of trapped in this vicious cycle of domestic violence. That in some ways she was trapped economically, but she was also trapped mentally and emotionally. Remember, Mom went through the trauma of losing her husband and being thrust into this responsibility of raising 3 kids on her own. And it was kind of like the boil the frog. It didn't happen all at once. It slowly got worse and worse and worse and worse. And isn't it, interesting, our propensity for pain, it's like it goes up and up and up. And so it didn't all happen at once, but by the time I was, 12, 13, 14, things were not good at home. I was, my brother and his older friends, when I was 9, my brother and his older friends were using drugs. And they asked me to join. And I joined. And, I've shared this, Daniel, with over 1 million young people. I didn't join because I was curious about getting high. I didn't join because I thought it'd be cool or I was being rebellious. I joined because I was craving that social connection. And I wanted to fit. I wanted to fit in. I wanted friends. I was willing to sacrifice myself.
Did it feel like a sacrifice?
Well, my right or wrong, my sacrifice, my sense of right or wrong. I knew it was wrong, and I was willing to set that aside for the social currency. Yeah.
Okay.
And I got high, but then the next thing that happened sort of sealed my fate. Is that I went home and I was sitting on this ugly green plaid couch watching Happy Days or Gilligan's Island or some stupid thing on TV. And my stepfather come in the house, and he used to come in the house drunk and loud and belligerent and angry. And he'd be deliberately loud when he came in the house to intimidate everyone. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of him. Under the influence, for the first time, I wasn't as scared. I had found a way to cope with the uncertainty of life. When I think about COVID and what everybody's been through the last couple of years, it's pretty normal and natural that people are hitting different things to shift their emotional, to change their emotional state. That's why we see an uptick in recreational drugs and eating and gaming and isolation, depression, anxiety, all of those things, because we don't do well with fear and anxiety.
So were you enjoying it? You're sitting on the plaid couch watching whatever. I don't know why it matters in the story, why it's a green plaid couch, but for some reason that paints a certain kind of picture that makes sense to me. Were you enjoying the feeling before your stepdad walked in, or was that when you realized that, hey, I like this stuff, is when he started being all scary and you weren't scared?
Well, no, I think I probably enjoyed it from the first moment that,
Yeah.
that state of consciousness changed, but I didn't realize how valuable it was for me
Mm-hmm.
until I had that interaction with that. We talked about the impact of bullying. I had a bully that lived in my house. And for some reason, I had a target on my back. I had a strong relationship with my mom. And so my older brother didn't get it as bad as me. My little sister didn't get it as bad as I got the brunt of this guy's anger and discontentment with life.
Mm-hmm.
And under the influence, it was like, you can't get me anymore. And I remember smiling at him like a Cheshire cat. I just went like, good luck, buddy.
Mm-hmm.
And it became a place I ran to for the next 15 years. By the time I was 14 or 15, I had a chip on my shoulder the size of South Dakota. I was angry. I was pissed at the world. And I hated anything that looked like authority. I didn't like teachers. I didn't like government. I didn't like the police. I didn't like my stepfather. I had no respect for him. And I didn't understand until years later that the people that were, given the responsibility to keep me safe failed. And so I didn't like anything that looked like that or felt like that. I've gone through and done some written work on that now, and I'm okay with it. But it's like, I started to push back at 15. I started to push back hard, and I got kicked out of the house. At 16, I dropped out of school, and at 17, I was involved in the criminal justice system. And it all happened so fast. And so, today when I meet young people and people that are struggling and challenging, whatever's happening at 14, 15, 16, 17 is usually something that happened when they were 4, 5, 6. Early life trauma has a way of following us our entire lives, man. I'm 56 and I'm still dealing with shit that happened before I was 10.
Yeah. Yeah. So did you ever end up like how did you support yourself? You're out on the street? Like, were you right to the street, or did you have like a digression?
Yeah, it is a progression. In most cases, it is. It's actually one of the things that I learned when I became a youth homeless advocate is that most youth homelessness is invisible. It's couch surfing. It's, right tonight, somebody in Saskatoon is going to get in a fight with their mom or dad, and they're going to slam the door and they're going to go. Now, if they've got a relative, an auntie, an uncle, a friend, a grandpa, grandma, someplace safe where there's oversight, they're going to land fine. But if they don't, they're going to couch surf. Maybe they're in a drug house. Maybe they're exposed to crime and predation, and maybe they get exposed to things or they get manipulated. So it's like, in the beginning, I was, kind of couch surfing and, cheap rent here or there. I tried to continue my studies in school, but it didn't work. And so slowly over time, it started to erode.
So we've got a picture here, and I'm just going to display it now. So this is your mother, correct?
Yeah.
And that's you. Well, it looks like you're graduating.
Yeah.
Is that grade 12?
No, gosh, that's college. Yeah, that's college. And that happened much, much later. I had to go through a whole pile of hell before we got to that shot. Funny thing about me is that I started getting kicked out of school and started getting in trouble in school. And not because I was not intelligent, although I walked around with a story that I was dumb. But, I just had all these problems that were kind of coming out sideways. And it got me into a lot of trouble. I got kicked out or failed at 3 of the 4 high schools. And so for the longest time in my life, I really didn't think that school was for me, and so I traveled down that road and I eventually wore my welcome out in the little town that I was living in. And I thought a change of scenery was in store. And so I decided I'm going to go west. And so I went to Toronto, and back in those days, it was 1986 and the World's Fair, Expo 86 was going on in Vancouver. And so I thought, I'll go out to Vancouver, I'll get a job, I'll make a brand new start of life, and it's going to be great.
Let's go to Vancouver to get away from the drugs.
Yeah, right? Like, give me a break, man. But not only that, I moved away from all my support.
Now, hang on a second here. You had to know at that age that Vancouver was the place to be if you wanted to get high at that time, right? Like,
no,
you didn't know that?
No, I was really naive. I mean, I was like, by this time I was 18. There was one thing that was keeping me back in Barrie. By this time I'd moved from the little town in Midland. I was now living in Barrie, which is, even back then, it was still a fairly small city. It was like 25,000. It's huge now.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a relationship with a gal I was dating in grade 10. And it was really the only thing I was holding on to that was kind of like normal. But my behavior was going, I was getting into trouble. I was getting arrested. I was getting like, I really had this big mask that I wore, that I was this kind of tough guy and stuff. Meanwhile, inside I was just like this scared little boy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that relationship ended up dissolving. And when that happened, that's when I made the decision to go to Vancouver. But no, I didn't really think about it. It's like, yeah, we know that Vancouver is a place that's a hotbed for drugs. But at 18, 19 years old, I didn't have that knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And all I knew was that Expo was going on in Vancouver, and there was a high likelihood that I could get a job.
Mm-hmm.
And why not? Let's go west, go west, young man. And so that's what I did. I went to Toronto. I bought a one-way ticket. Back in those days, you could get a ticket to go anywhere in Canada on the Greyhound for $99.
Wow.
Yeah. So I jumped on, and 3.5 days later. And I remember when I got off the bus, it was on Georgia Street,
Mm-hmm.
the old bus station right across from the Sandman, down around where the hockey rink in the BC Place State. And I went down, and there was this park, and the sun was coming up over the downtown east side. And I remember having this beautiful feeling like Vancouver's where I'm going to make it. This is my town. And it was like this huge just surge of positive energy. Like,
you weren't scared at all, like leaving the environment you grew up in, and you weren't like, this is a scary new place. Like it just seems like
soon I was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Soon I was, because that faded.
Yeah.
And within a few weeks, I was actually living in that park.
Yeah.
You see, I was so naive, right? I moved away from my mom, who still had her eyes on me, right? Mom was always there for me. She would, even when I was out spinning for prizes, she would come by and find me and bring me a bag of groceries, take me out for lunch. I had extended family. I had schools that I could have reconnected with. I had friends. But now, here I am, this kid in his late teens, a whole pile of mistakes under his belt, and I land in Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no idea the hurt and pain that was waiting for me.
We got a couple of comments coming in here. Let's see, who do we got here? From our friend Alan. Alan, good to see you tonight. Thank you so much for the comment. Alan says, early life traumas definitely has a way of following us throughout our lives. Yet, what I love about you, Joe Roberts, I'm going to try to say it in his voice. What I love about you, Joe Roberts, is you chose to do the work. I love you, man. Did I do a good Alan impersonation? No?
Part of that was pretty Alan-esque. Not bad.
We got another one here from Todd.
Thanks, Al.
Podcaster, host of Bunny Hugs and Mental Health. Good to see you, Todd. Thanks for the comment. Todd says, I'm 45 and been doing the work for 15 years and just getting to some traumas now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I didn't understand how much was below the surface. I had two big issues going on. I had the trauma and abuse, verbal and emotional abuse of my stepfather, and I had the grief of losing dad. And I never really paused to think about that. I was a man. I was taught all those false pretenses. Big boys don't cry. Suck it up, buttercup. And so I put on the tough guy mask. But meanwhile, I was just hurting. I was scared. But I knew how to run. And I wasn't impervious to pain. I didn't mind pain. So I went from smoking grass and, popping pills to, hitting that crack pipe and getting into heroin. And by the time I was in my late teens, I was a guy pushing a shopping cart, collecting cans and bottles, addicted to opiates. And I can remember so many days, pushing that cart around, Vancouver's east side, thinking, how the hell did I end up here? I came from I had a good dad, I had a great mom, had a pretty good start. How did I end up, addicted to dope on the 100 block East Hastings?
Tell us about the first time, when you were smoking weed, doing sort of, I don't want to say benign substances, but perhaps less harmful. What was it like the first time you were confronted with the opportunity to smoke crack or even like to do heroin? Were you like, yeah, give me that, let's do it? Or was there fear involved, or was there a need to escape? Like tell us about that.
I think that it had more to do with the social circle I kept. I'm very much, it's funny because people call me a leader today, and it's like, nah, I don't know. I'm a pretty big follower. You put me in a group of people, and give me a day or two, I'll sound like them, I'll walk like them, I'll talk like them. When I went to Vancouver, the circle was doing these different things, and it's like, oh, okay, when in Rome. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
had that been available to me in Barrie, Ontario, I don't think I would have looked at it. And yeah, there was anxiety, especially when we got into the different ways. And I don't want to trigger folks, but I went from smoking and drinking and popping pills to doing drugs, using drugs intravenously, and getting into some really high dangerous exposure stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I was using drugs during the HIV epidemic. I was, there's a good shot of me on the Jenny Crack diet there on the yeah, that picture right there, that's 1989. That was towards the end.
Mm-hmm.
Pushing a shopping cart in Vancouver's east side, mumbling to himself, living under a blue tarp. And I had lost. Well, I didn't lose everything. I knew where it went, but
Yeah.
I lost hope, and the one thing that I know and that recovery gave me is that no matter what, inside each and every one of us is an unlimited, untapped possibility and potential. No matter where you are today, starting today, your future is spotless.
Mm-hmm.
And all we have to do is make a decision. That's where I want to go.
I like that.
Whether
I like that a
that's
lot. I've never. Your future is spotless. Like what a simple yet glaringly obvious thing to say. That's beautiful, man. I like that.
Well, you think about it, Daniel. What are you? I mean, when I ask this question, when I workshop it with business people, they'll say, "Well, I'm Canadian," or they may say their gender, or they may say their heritage or their parents' heritage. They may say they may identify with religion. They may identify with their occupation. But ultimately, what are we? We're, if you put all the big stuff aside, we're consciousness. And in consciousness, we have access to choices, thoughts, and decisions. And so it's what we do. That's what possibility. That's why I was riffing on that possibility before we got started today. We are nothing but possibility. And we don't need to be defined by our past. We can let that past be the catalyst to who we want to become. That's why some of the most beautiful people I know in my life today are people in recovery. Because they know what life looks like when it's shit. And they have a different outlook today. They're also people that feel at an incredibly deep and profound level because they've been hurt. Yeah. And so when you harness that, there's no place and no thing that you can't do with it. It's getting through and around and through some of the really tough stuff, but it's not easy, but it's worth it, And that's like I said, it's not about, like, how did I get from where I am today to where I was back then? It's just doing lots of small things and, following advice and going, doing the do. And having a real clear perspective on where it is that I want to go.
Got another comment coming in here. Regan, thank you for the comment. Regan says, I'm a recovering addict of 4 years and now doing an addictions course, but watching a W5 video of Hastings this afternoon, and it was still so triggering. Do you still get triggered, Joe?
Yeah, I do, but in a different way. Like for me, what happens, the triggering looks like I get scared and I want to run. Now, before that was a longer tape. It's like, I'm scared, I want to run, and this is what I want to run with. So then there would be like thoughts and cravings and stuff like that. And what I've learned over the years is the first thing to do is, you go find somebody, rat yourself out, and just talk about what's going on. Today, I do get triggered, but it's usually not by like I totally understand that. 4 years, you see certain drugs and especially if it's related to our story, that can bring up a lot of. For me, it's usually when I get scared, when I get anxious. COVID triggered me a lot. It's like, I'm a professional speaker. I travel, and in 1 week I lost, I don't know, like a year and a half's worth of engagements. It evaporated. It's like, okay, what are we going to do now? Now the thought comes up, maybe I can, maybe I'll get loaded, but then I think, nah, I don't want to do that. That'll just,
it's lame.
It's not going to be, it's not lame. It's just not going to be fun. I've been there, done that. Right. But the feeling of wanting to escape. And so sometimes, and I'll be honest and human, sometimes it's not drugs, but it's a pizza. You know,
Yeah.
it's a cake. I don't
Work.
mean a slice. I mean, it's a cake.
Hmm.
But we find ways to alter our emotional state. I mean, at least I do.
Hmm.
All right. But that trigger for me is usually fear.
Mm. You know, and like when I blah, blah, blah. Right before the pandemic, I was really involved in jujitsu, and what I always used to say, and I still say to this day, is like nothing will put you in the moment faster than a dude on top of you trying to choke you out. You know.
Yeah. And
So.
in many ways, that's what COVID was. It attacked us socially, it attacked us
Hmm.
emotionally, it attacked us environmentally, it attacked us mentally, and it attacked us physically. And
Hmm.
so we got all these assaults. Now, a friend of mine, and good, a former business partner. He's a PhD in sports
Hmm.
psych, but he's also a psychologist. Well, he's a psychologist, but he's also a former Olympic athlete. And what he said to me was really interesting. He said, overnight, everyone got to feel what it's like to be an elite athlete, except they weren't prepared for it because the stressors literally went to like DEFCON 5 for
Hmm.
everything overnight. And if you didn't have a really robust resiliency toolbox, it started to show and has continued to show in different people's lives in different ways. When the pandemic hit for me, it's weird. My experience was, I've been here before. You know, this is what life on the street was like.
Hmm.
You know, I lived in an unsafe environment that had no predictable end. You know, I would huddle up under that bridge every night, not knowing what was going to happen, if it was going to be a safe night's sleep or not. I wake up in the morning with anxiety and problems that didn't have solutions, and somehow I had to muddle through.
Hmm.
And I didn't always make the best choices in the midst of that emotional uncertainty.
Yeah.
Now, you may never, live in a doorway or be addicted to drugs, but I think that describes really well what a lot of people have been through for the last 3 years.
I mean,
Various different.
there was a time in early COVID, and I'll get a little vulnerable myself, where I was afraid to look in the mirror. You know, I was afraid to roll up in front of my driveway because the thought of going in and shutting the door behind me was a real thing. You know, and I was able to lean on some of the tools that I had learned in my recovery to get through that. But yeah, that was a very real threat for me, and you know, we're here today, and I don't know, better because of it. Like I definitely feel like I'm stronger because of it, you know. But we're jumping ahead here a little bit. Now let's go back. What finally did it for you? You're on the streets of East Hastings. You're living under a tarp in doorways and walking around mumbling. What finally did it? Was it a pinnacle moment? Like, did you have an aha moment, or did something real terrible happen, or what's the story, man?
Well, it was years and years, well, months, and then years of the same day. It was like Groundhog Day, right? And I know that's a common theme within people in addiction. I was on the street. It wasn't so much that I was on the street and I was homeless and addicted to drugs. It's that I got okay with it. It's like,
This is just life now.
yeah. And I didn't really have a whole lot of hope. And my life literally was from 8 hours, 8-hour chunks
Hmm.
because of the opioids. And so one day, 3 days before Christmas, I was sitting in the pouring rain in Pigeon Park, which is right in the epicenter of the downtown east side. And I was rocking back and forth, and I was beginning to descend into opiate withdrawal. And, I don't want to trigger folks, but for those of you who don't know what that experience is like, it's like the worst flu you've ever had times 1,000, except $10 will make it go away.
Hmm.
You get the hot sweats, cold sweats, dry mouth, aching bones, upset stomach, high level of anxiety, except $10. And I didn't want to rob or steal. And I also didn't want to go and collect $10 worth of aluminum cans and bottles, because it takes time and effort. And I was really starting to feel sick, and looked down at my feet, and I came up with what I thought was the best idea. And I walked into the hotel across the street. It used to be called the Rainbow Rooms. It's called the Pennsylvania today. I think it's Gov Housing, so that's a good thing. And I went to the back booth where the usual suspects were, the dealers, and I sold the only item I had left in the world that was worth anything. It was the boots off my feet. And I remember walking out of that pub, and my foot touched that cold concrete sidewalk. And I remember, I remember thinking, what have I done? And I remember feeling this dread and this, like, honestly, Daniel, like I didn't want to be here anymore, you know? Like life was just so painful, man. And I couldn't see a way out. And I was grateful that it was raining because the rain hid the tears of shame. As I walked up East Hastings, and I, instead of acting on those feelings of self-harm, I did something different, and I said a little prayer. And I would never describe myself as someone deeply religious, but I've always believed in a higher power. And I said something like, God, give me a second chance. I don't deserve it. But if you give me a second chance, I promise I won't waste the opportunity. And I promise I'll do something to pay it forward. And the next day I walked into a resource center. I think it was from the Salvation Army Resource Center. It was right on Hastings across from the old Woodwards. And there was a guy in there. I think his name was Bob. And he got me a pair of shoes because he noticed like right away I didn't have footwear. And then he said, what do you want to do? And I said, I think I want to get clean. I think I want to go to treatment. And I remember he had this like big smile that came across his face, and he came around to give me a hug. And that day in the drop-in center was like butter squash soup day. And so he had this like apron full of butter squash soup, and I didn't want to hug him, right? Because he had a squash all over his shirt, man. I'm like, get away from me. Meanwhile, I've been wearing the same clothes for a year and a half.
I was gonna call you out on that, but
pride is a funny thing, right?
Yeah, and I can relate.
Like
I can relate, man. Like I had the same thing. Like I wouldn't take my boots off until I couldn't handle the greasy feeling anymore. Like I'd leave them on for weeks. I'd sleep on a couch with no cushions. My house didn't have heat in it. It was final stages of foreclosure. So like, I would take my shirt off and my chest would be dirty. Like the dirt soaked through my shirt. So when you say like I haven't changed for a year, like I get that, man. Like I get it.
Yeah, but he did lay a hug on me, and then he took me in the back office and we did an inventory list of people or things, resource. Like I understand what he did now, but I didn't understand what he was doing there. He did an asset inventory. He just kind of was like, okay, who do you have in your life? What do you have? You want to get clean. Where are the people in your life? And, the person at the top of that list was Mom. And he said, why don't we give her a call? And I'm like, I burned that bridge, or so I thought. I said, I tax Mom a lot of phone calls from jail, a lot of probation appointments, a lot of court appearances, a lot of Hail Marys to Mom, right? Mm-hmm. I don't want to bug her. And he said, you know what? Moms never give up. And he said, let's give her a holler. And so we did. And she came out. She agreed to help me one last time. And she flew out to Vancouver. She met me on the corner of Main and Hastings. I was about 160 pounds.
How tall are you?
6'2", 6'2.5". So I was pretty emaciated. There's a good picture you showed a little bit before, and my ribs are there. That hangster, the prankster on the right there. And she gave me that mom hug, and a kiss on the cheek, and she said, "Let's get you the help you need." You see, I had all this potential inside me, but I didn't know how to access it. I didn't know how to get clean, and I didn't know how to stay clean. Mm-hmm. And she brought me back to Ontario. I entered into a detox facility in Kingston, Ontario. That led to a full residential treatment program 7 days later in Belleville. And for the next 5 years, I stayed there for about 6 months. And then I got my own 1-bedroom apartment, and I went back to college. And after 3.5 years at college, I graduated with honors.
So now we can do this.
Yeah, and there's that picture. Still a bit of a hairdo though. Yeah,
looking good, brother. Looking good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember that day, and I walked on. They called my name. They said Joe Roberts, Dean's List. I grew up with a lifetime thinking I was dumb, and I wasn't. And you'll never discover your possibility unless you have the courage to step outside of your comfort zone.
Ain't that the fact?
Every single one of us sits on this powdered keg of possibility. But fear is what keeps us small. Fear is what keeps us, it's like we have dreams, we have aspirations. But in order to achieve those, you got to get up off that park bench and take some steps forward. You got to step into that unknown. You got to step into that stuff that's kind of scary. I remember walking into my first meeting. I was terrified.
Mm-hmm.
I remember a guy come up, this gangster-looking guy, wanted to lay a hug on me. I'm like, what?
Did you hug him?
I just felt weird, awkward, not a place. But it's like, I remember there was this one key guy that plays such an important role in my life, and his name was Gus, and I met him on a park bench in front of the Army and Navy in Vancouver. And the only reason I met he was an older man, he was in his 70s. The only reason I met him is that he had a cigarette and I was a mooch. And I saw this guy and I put he was a mark to me, right? And I'm like, I'm going to get a smoke off this guy. And so I go and I sit down beside him, and and I'm really selfish, and yet he laid something on me that was so heavy. Yeah, he gave me a cigarette, and he even gave me a couple bucks. But I remember he looked at me and he said, Joe, he says, you're an amazing young man. He says, you got this homeless addiction thing going on, but if you were able to deal with some of these problems you've got, you could go out into the world and you could do something extraordinary. He said, there's more to you than you can see. At the time, sitting beside him on that park bench, I was dirty. I had black fingernails, scruffy beard, broken yellow teeth, clothes I've been wearing for a year. But he looked past my probability and spoke to my possibility. And for the first time in my life, someone other than my mom or my daddy spoke to my potential. This is why recovery works, Daniel. This is why it works. It's this collective of those of us with a day or more say to the guy who's coming in, a gal who's coming in fresh, and say, I believe in you. I don't care what your past is. I don't care what people have said to you. I don't care what's happened to you. I care. I'm not unempathetic, but it doesn't reflect who you are and where you're going. I've just seen too many miracles for you to get me to not believe. And Gus was right. I went back to school. I graduated with honors. I remember walking across that stage, and my recovery crowd was in the audience. They were hooting and hollering, bringing down property values, scaring everyone around, because they knew. They knew how far I had to travel. To walk that 25 feet across that stage, eh?
Mm-hmm. So tell us a little more about your first year. Now, you said you walked into your first meeting, so you kind of blew your anonymity right there. So I feel like it's probably okay to talk a little bit about that. I don't know if you're still a program guy or whatever that is. I'm sure we'll learn more as we go along here. But I think it's important to talk about those pinnacle moments, that first meeting and then, subsequent meetings. Did you stay there? Did you work the steps? Did you get a sponsor? Like, what worked for you? And almost more importantly, what didn't?
Yeah. Look, all my using was in a social context, so it was so perfect that all my recovery was in a social context. Mm. Warren Buffett said, "Show me the five people you spend the most time with, and I'll show you, and I'll tell you who you are." Think about that. For years I hung around with, hangster, prankster, gangster guys, and emulated that lifestyle, and then I found myself. In a treatment center. So that was good. And then I got introduced to the recovery community, and I started to go to meetings. Yeah, I did. I did everything they told me to do. I got a sponsor. I became of service. I showed up. I stacked chairs. Back then we had ashtrays we emptied. It was like I did everything that they told me to do. Yeah. And there were things I didn't like, but I was also brought up around a harder group of people that just said, suck it up, buttercup. You're not going to like everything, and that's okay. Just stick around long enough for the miracle to happen. And it did. And, what happened for me is that I hung around this recovery community long enough that the desire to use went away.
So you were still fighting the urges? Like, how long did that take for the urges to stop, like, manifesting?
I think it was a combination of two things. It's like they're still there, not as frequently. Sometimes it'll be years before I have sort of that. But in the beginning, they happened a lot more. But the more connected to a sense of purpose in life I had, the less they impacted me. And the more I used the tools of recovery, going to meetings, working through, doing the writing, talking, connecting with community, the less of an impact it had on me. It's like when I was isolated, it had way more of an impact than when I wasn't. And that's still today. It's like I'm not, and I'll tell you the truth too, is that I sailed through recovery in the beginning. I was a one-hit wonder. I came in, I got clean, I didn't relapse, I went to meetings, I was a good little boy in recovery. And that produced self-righteousness.
Now you're the best at recovery.
Yeah. I didn't understand relapse. So when people come in, it's like, I relapsed again. I was like, oh,
you didn't do the work.
Yeah. I had to get a sponsor. I had this, until it happened. At 12 years, 5 days clean, I went in for some elective surgery. They gave me a whole bottle of fun pills. And instead of taking one every 4 hours, like 4 every 1 hour. And I flushed 12 years and 5 days down the toilet just like that. But it didn't happen just like that. See, that's the thing. Yeah, I abused that medication, but it had been happening for a long time. I had drifted, I got away from my spiritual practice. I got away from the meetings. I got like the boiling frog. What happened was I became, but I got so damn successful in the business world. After I graduated school, I went out in business and I crushed it. And I drifted from recovery. And so at 5 years or 12 years, I relapsed. And I had a rock star bank account at this time. And so I was able to insulate myself from a lot of the, the homelessness and the street involved stuff. But after 3.5 years, I was back to, living in a broken down van, very, very close to my old neighborhood. And I crawled my way back into a Surrey recovery house in 2007.
Is this when you were talking about your relapse at 12 years?
Yeah.
It went all the way back downhill again.
Oh yeah. I flushed that. That was a brush fire. Oh. Because I had money. I had lots of money. I went out. See, after graduating, I went out. I moved back to Vancouver, and I got my first job in sales, and then I did that for a year. I was really, really good at it. Go figure. I had the gift of gab. There was a lot of transferable skills from being on the street, and I leveraged those and parlayed those into the business world. And I left my first sales job, and a friend of mine asked me to join a company. In less than 12 years, I was on the cover of Canadian Business as a celebrated entrepreneur. So I literally went from Skid Row to CEO. And things were going swimmingly well until they weren't, until I misused that medication. And then I remember having that panic. It's like 12 years. I was clean for 12 years. And then I wasn't. I was now back in the grip, and I was hiding it. I was still doing meetings for a little while too. I was like going to meetings dirty.
So during that 12 years, then you stayed close to the program, even despite your success in isolating yourself or insulating yourself, as you put it, from that, you still went to meetings.
I would say the first 5, 7, 8 years. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happened in there, though. It's like I graduated, I went into business. So the first 5 years of my recovery was rock solid, doing everything right. But then I left Belleville and I moved back to Vancouver. So years 5 through 8, still really good, reconnected with a different recovery community in the West Coast. But then the business started to sort of explode underneath me. I went from 2 of us in a basement to 50 people in a downtown office suite, and I had all this massive responsibility on my shoulders, and I drifted.
Did you see it coming?
Well,
like when all the money started coming in and things started to get really successful, did you start to get that itch? Like, did you start to see yourself slipping, or did it sneak up on you?
No, dude, this disease is a disease that tells you you don't have a disease. You don't see it coming.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I saw, like if you would have confronted me on some of my stuff and I liked you, I would have said, yeah, I agree with you. I'm a little drifted. And then I would have rationalized or justified it. Yeah, but, I'm kind of busy. I'm an important guy, don't you know? And it's like,
Don't you know who I think I am?
yeah, exactly. Well, and the problem is that I was started to believe my own press releases.
Mm.
That I was all that in a bag of chips, and I wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was playing precariously towards close to the edge, but it wasn't like I was planning and plotting a relapse. It just, I let my defenses down, and more what happened is the concrete eroded underneath me.
Mm-hmm.
I stopped taking care of the foundational stuff. And then, yeah, it happened. And then when it happened, I was panicky, and now I'm trying to hide it and run. And it just turned into a gong show, and I was out for 3.5 years. And then finally, when I had nothing left again, I crawled my way back, went into a Surrey recovery house, and started doing meetings again. And on March 13th of this year, I'll have 16 years again. Yeah, so
I just have a really, really quick question, because like we're talking about this relapse, and I'm just curious, like, did you know the medication that you were getting? Like, did you have an opportunity to say, yep, that's probably not a good choice for me? Or did you feel so confident in where you were at in your recovery that you were like, I think it'll be okay?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, Donna. Like, I knew what they were giving me wasn't. Yeah. Yeah, it was cherries and ice cream, and I knew but
You were like playing Russian roulette then?
Yeah, I wasn't thinking. In some ways, if I was really honest, it was like, I get a freebie. Yeah, I'm having surgery, so I get a freebie.
Yeah.
And
all justified
what
right
I
up.
know now. Yeah, and so what I know now is that when I get, because I'm 56, and you don't stay healthy forever, is that when I'm in those situations today, I'm super, super duper accountable. Like if for whatever reason, like if I have a root canal and they give me, I don't touch that. That goes to somebody else, and I have sort of two-party authentication in order for me to. So, but at the time, yeah, I was playing loose, and probably wasn't. Yeah, Russian roulette's a great metaphor, and I wasn't thinking.
We've got some accolades coming in for you, Joe. We've got Angela Lee saying congrats on 16 years. Renee saying congrats. Pat saying congrats. Thanks so much. Yeah. We have a question here too, and it's interesting that it's a question about mom because it's my mom.
Hey, Brenda.
Hey, mom. So, Brenda asks, did your mom see it coming when you relapsed?
Yeah, mom didn't. But guess what? Yeah, she was there again. Yeah, I had a daughter, and she would have gone into care if it wasn't for mom. So, it's funny, Brenda, like, it's like my mom wasn't as integral a part of my life in those days. I had sort of grown up and left the nest, so she didn't really know what was going on. She certainly knew when she saw me, after I was 6, 7, 8 months into this thing, into the relapse. She was like, oh no. And a lot of people were like that, oh no. And yeah, it was. I can't imagine how hard it was for her to sit in the sidelines, because she thought she was out of the woods, eh? I remember us having a real heart-to-heart, and she said, the hardest days of my life were sitting late at night when you were out, and not knowing if I was going to get a phone call or a knock on the door.
Yeah.
And I remember when she said that to me, it was like, fucking broke my heart. It's like, we don't think about it, what we're doing to the people we love, because it's such a selfish game, addiction, and we don't think about that impact we have.
I'm only hurting me.
Yeah, bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Not to place guilt or undue pressure on anybody else, but it's like these are some of the things that we try and clean up. And today, what I'm trying to do is just simply live my best life. And I learned from that from that relapse. And I'm pretty vigilant today
Mm-hmm.
about some things. I've got some real hardline boundaries, and because it did happen. And
that's a good spot for another comment here. Mike B Sobriety Project. Mike, thanks so much for the comment. Mike says, powerful lesson to remember your program. Even though I have my own program and did it on my own, my golden rule is to do something every day that pertains to it, regardless how small the action. Can you relate to that, Joe?
Oh yeah. I like that, Mikey. Yeah, for sure. And in fact, that's really a good segue to what happened next. It's like I clawed my way out of that gutter again. And, I put a couple of solid years underneath me. And I remember my friends in recovery, they're like, don't put your business suit on. Don't go back into that high pressure business world because it's a risk for you right now. So I actually got a gutter cleaning and a painting business. I got a ladder and a little van, and I went around Surrey cleaning windows and gutters and pressure washing. And that's what it was called, Joe Jobs.
And you can make good money doing that too. I mean, maybe not CEO money, but
no, but it was, I got up every day. I went out, I put in a hard day's work. I got dirty. I got paid cash. It was good. It was really good. And I went to a meeting every day. So it's like, and that built a war chest for me to get out. And after 2 years, I moved back into Vancouver. I did put my suit and tie on, and away I went. And, I built it back relatively quickly. I had really good contacts. I understand I had a pretty good business brain, but in 2000 and around 2010, right around when the Olympics came to Vancouver, I pulled the pin and decided I wanted to do something to really draw focus to youth at risk and youth homelessness. And I started tinkering around with this idea of walking across the country. And I remember how the idea first came sort of into the ether is I was on an airplane with my business partner at the time, Dr. Sean Richardson. And I said, Sean, I want to do something, as a pay it forward project. And I told him about that moment I had in the streets in East Vancouver where I had that little prayer and I promised I would do something to pay it forward. And so I sort of fessed up to him and said, I think I've got some work to do. And he said to me, he says, when Canadians want to raise money or they want to inspire, they run across the country like Terry Fox or Rick Hansen. He said, why don't you run across Canada? And I looked
at him
right now.
Yeah.
I said, why don't you run across Canada?
Yeah.
Smart guy. Like, I ain't going to run across. At the time, I was like 60 pounds heavier than I am right now. I'm a non-athlete. I failed grade 9 and grade 10, Jim. I ain't running to the store. Forget about running across Canada.
With a shopping cart, no less.
Well, that's how he sold it to me. He says, well, maybe don't run. What if you walked? And I went, okay, well, there's lots of walks. How would it be different? He said, push a shopping cart. It's the symbol of chronic homelessness. It's the thing that you're trying to avoid for every kid in this country. And so it was like, I remember the hair on my neck went up. I'm like, push a shopping cart across Canada.
You son of a bitch, I'm in.
Yeah, well, it was like, And, I've always fashioned myself a possibility thinker. It's like, yeah, it's going to be hard. Yeah, it's going to be epic. Yeah, it's going to be difficult. But is it possible? And so we spent the next 4 years building this thing. And, we had to raise $1 million because we didn't want donations to go into the bucket to pay for the campaign. And we needed to get a shopping cart, like a custom one. I don't know about you, every time I go to Home Depot or wherever I get the shopping cart with the broken wheel, it was no one. Yeah.
Interprovincial shopping cart.
Yeah. And inter-season shopping cart because
there's
no way to cross the country without one Canadian winter.
Get some chains on that thing.
Yeah. And so finally, we worked our tails off, and I finally found myself in Cape Spear, Newfoundland. And in front of me was 17 months and 9,000 kilometers. And we started the walk across Canada. I don't know. Do you have that? I think we have a video that we can share.
Well, let's roll the tape.
A little bit of, let's roll that.
Here we go.
Coming over the bridge. Here we are. And there's Joe.
Coming into Ontario, we had the OPP behind us, which was so key to help us engage in communities. Now, by the time we got to Ottawa, we'd been walking for over 5.5 months. Toronto was pretty special.
It's amazing that law enforcement and like, look at, like, that's not cheap, man. Like, look at all this. This is beautiful.
Oh yeah. And you know, there was a way that we sold it to them, and it was about youth safety and youth mental health, and they got behind it in a solid way. The most unlikely partner. And then winter, Northern Ontario, Lake Superior. And as we went along, you know, the momentum just started to build, and a lot of that was because of the kids. You know, we got an opportunity to engage over 100,000 students. It was just...
Okay, watch close here. There's a picture of Joe being chased by a bear. Watch for it.
It's not real. Where is it? It's coming up.
There it is.
There it is. Ah.
Oh, shoot.
That's all right. You know, when that campaign was over, Daniel, I'd walked 11,375,000 steps, and I didn't lose a pound. But there's no justice. But
so before we get too far away from it, what do you feel when you look at that now? Like, what a gift. Like, what do you feel when you look at that?
It reminds me that anything is possible. So when I'm going through my day-to-day and I'm going through challenges, I know, you know, I met David Goggins down in Vegas at a conference, and David Goggins is an elite, a high-performance athlete and an endurance athlete. And he says, when we're at 40%, or when we think we're at our max, we're only at 40%. What I understand today is that anything is possible. You know, it's like we have capacity beyond what most of us have really taxed. And where most people sit, unfortunately, is they're on the wrong side of a crap load of work. But when you do the steps, when you move forward, when you take, you know, when you get up off that couch or that park bench and you walk forward towards your hopes, your dreams, the things that you're passionate about, magic happens. This is possibility is the heartblood of every innovation within our culture over the last 10,000 years. It's what created flight. It's what created the iPhone. It's the thing that we admire in every great leader. And it's not exclusive to some, this group or that group, this age or that group, this heritage or that. No, every single one of us has access to it. And when we get connected to our purpose and our passion, and we have the courage to take a few steps forward, the path unfolds for us. And this is the story behind every single person who's in recovery. Mm-hmm. They took steps forward, and guess what they discovered? Their recovery possibility.
Mm-hmm. So what are you up to these days, man? Tell us a little bit about what life looks like for you now.
I do a lot of, I'm doing a lot of speaking. So I wrote a book. I travel throughout North America now. I talk on mental health. I talk on possibility. I work with, you know, I'm actually heading to Saskatoon. I'm getting to work with Peter Ballantyne, Children Family Services. I'm actually coming to Saskatoon to speak for the Métis homelessness event that we're having. Gosh, I knew you were going to ask me that, and I don't know. But
when you come,
I can get it.
When
I
you
will.
come,
yeah.
Come over. We'll have a cup of coffee. We'll get you in the studio here, and we'll chat for a while, and we'll blast it out to Facebook.
I'd love that.
Yeah,
you know, the thing that I'm doing now is I want to spread a message of possibility and hope. I want to take my lived experience and I want to shine it into different places that need it, whether that's commercial bankers or cops, whether that's social workers or people in recovery, or whether that's students. You know, I want to just simply trumpet the message that inside each and every one of us is more than we can see. That simple truth that Gus gave me on that park bench is what I want to do with the rest of my life. And I want to leave you with one last little story, and I know we're approaching our time, but when I was in Newfoundland, a reporter asked me what the push for change meant to me. And it just so happened 4 or 5 days prior to that, I was out, walking on this real desolate piece of highway in the pouring rain. And I happened to look down at the same moment. I saw this penny caked in the dirt. And I remember bending down in the pouring rain, and I picked this penny up. And this penny was dirty and corroded, kind of similar to, I don't know if you can see this one right here. I know it's a little out of focus, but I picked it up and I held the penny in my hand, and I knew that it was some kind of talisman. It meant something, and I wasn't sure what. And I kept walking that day, and finally the metaphor came searing home to me. You see, I found this penny in the street. This penny had traveled a harder road. This penny had seen some things. This penny had spent a couple of nights in the weather. And this penny didn't look as pretty and shiny as the other pennies. But what occurred to me as I held that penny in my hand is that it doesn't matter, because by the very nature of what it is, it can never, ever, ever lose its value. And neither can a human being. And I put that penny in my pocket, and I was determined to give it to somebody who I thought shared that sentiment and values. And when I got to Vancouver, I gave it to the president of the United Association of Canada, Steve Morrison, and he traded me with a check for $1 million. And we use that money today to empower students and high-risk youth in school projects and programs right across this entire country. I believe that inside you, inside me, and inside all of us is an untapped, unlimited possibility and potential. Not because I read it in a book, and not because I went to some Tony Robbins seminar, but because in 1989, I used to live under the Georgia Street Viaduct. And today I don't.
Amazing, man. Thanks so much for sharing your stories with us tonight. Thank you so much for bringing some hope to the platform, some laying some wisdom on us. But we do have a couple more comments before we send you on your way. We have Allie here with a question, and I think it's a very powerful question. Allie asks, how do you recommend finding your passion? It's something on my mind heavy lately, but I'm struggling.
Yeah, I think that, first of all, there's a bit of a misnomer when we talk about finding our why or our passion. Simon Sinek did a really good job at talking about our why a few years ago. And I would say that it's not necessarily about finding your entire life compass. It's just do the things that you find the joy in. In one of my first books, I talked about sort of picturing life at the end. You're at your own funeral and people go around the room and describe who you were. What does that conversation sound like? And in that conversation is our roots and our core values. What are the things that are most important to us? And in that is passion and purpose. And so, it doesn't always just appear, like the clouds part and it's like, oh, and you've got the highway to walk. It's not like that. It's doing things that really float your boat, that if you won the lottery tomorrow and you could do anything, what would it be? If you had that winning lottery ticket, what difference would you make in the world? And maybe look and seek some of those things out and give them a whirl.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I can relate to that. And if I might just add a little bit to it, I tried to put expectations on my future in early recovery. I tried to, I'm going to be this or I'm going to be that. And then one day, after doing a bunch of work and going through a bunch of things and managing to stay sober, the idea came into my head to start a podcast. And that's when I did have that moment. I was walking down by the river with my little tiny dog. He's a big stinky dog now, but he was very cute at the time. And the name just came. I was looking out at the river. I remember what I was looking at, and the name just came, just Hard Knox Talks. And I stopped and I cried. And I felt like I'd been given that thing. Like, here is the thing that you're meant to do for the next while. It was beautiful. So that was my experience. And I didn't know how to open a Word document at the time. And now I've got this going on in my house. So I would recommend for anyone out there wondering how to find their passion to not put an expectation on it. Make sure that you're okay in the moment. Be where your hands are. And if you keep making the right next decisions, like a life unimaginable will unfold in front of you. And I'm sure Joe can contest to that.
Yeah, it's about and I love how you were on a walk and I was on a walk. It's about putting one foot in front of the other. You'll never discover it, and oftentimes it's just behind the thing that you failed last at. So it's about keeping your feet moving, and it'll keep knocking, seeking, asking. It'll appear.
Cool, man. All right. Well, we'll cut you loose for the night, man. Thank you so much again for joining us, and I guess that's it. Take care, my friend. We'll see you again.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, Donna, and thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah.
All right. If you're getting something out of what we're doing here tonight, you can find all our audios on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts, or live and interactive right here on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch TV. Thanks for watching. Take care, everyone. Good night.